Europe green lights Britain and France to arm the Kurds, but amid new reports of a massacre by Islamic State militants, it's already too late for thousands. Unconfirmed reports tonight of a massacre by those Yazidis who didn't make it to the refugee camps by Islamic militants. Good evening from Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan. Britain, France and others have got the European go-ahead to send weapons here to help Kurdish forces fight the militants who call themselves Islamic State. This as the Iraqi Prime Minister Maliki stepped down to allow a new man to try uniting Shia, Sunni and Kurdish leaders. But the refugees still arriving in the camps to the north of here are arriving with more tales of horror. Also tonight, this man wants to live in the Islamic State, but does that translate into support for IS in Britain? And from Gaza, Channel 4 News investigates the infamous shooting dead by sniper of an apparently unarmed man. We've been to the Israeli post that had clear line of sight.
Also on tonight's programme, David Cameron expresses grave concerns after Ukraine's president says he's destroyed Russian military vehicles which illegally crossed his border. Can the two countries now avert war on Europe's doorstep? US police say the unarmed Missouri teenager and officer shot dead, prompting days of riots, was suspected of robbery. And geek your heart out as fantasy fans descend on London for an interplanetary gathering like no other. Has sci-fi now got mass appeal?
Well, the European Union has welcomed moves by countries, including Britain, to arm the Kurds fighting Islamic State militants here in northern Iraq. Though with Kurdish leaders also talking of independence, the EU warned that such weapons should be approved by Baghdad first. It was the threatened extermination of Iraq's Yazidi minority which prompted calls to arm the Kurds. But reports are emerging tonight of jihadists killing scores of Yazidis in a village still trapped behind the front line. From Iraq's border with Syria, Jonathan Rugman reports.
The arming of Kurdish fighters has come too late for these refugees, now seeking sanctuary in the Kurdish north. The flood of Yazidis has reduced to a trickle, because almost everyone who can flee has. The UN reckons 95,000 have escaped from Mount Sinjar in the last 10 days. But these men say they are going back to rescue their relatives. Daoud Kassi says his father is too elderly to walk and is still trapped. While the Americans say the worst of this crisis is now over, for those who are living it, it's only just begun. These four families have been travelling in the back of a lorry for 7 hours in 46-degree heat. It was airdrops of food and water which kept them alive on Mount Sinjar for 15 days. They've just crossed from Syria back into Iraq. 19 people carrying so little between them that it would probably fit into one suitcase. They're told to wait here with other families for the next leg of their journey, to an unfinished building where friends are already camping out. And they insist there are hundreds still stranded on the mountain.
Hundreds of disabled people who could not walk stayed on the mountain. People were old. None of my family died, and I thank God for that.
It was a Syrian group of Kurdish fighters who brought these Yazidis down from Sinjar mountain. They don't even know that there was a plan for the British and the Americans to rescue them, and they say they left hundreds of dead people behind them. The EU's decision to arm these Kurds may persuade some Yazidis to return home, but only if Kurdish fighters battle jihadists in Yazidi towns and villages, not just in areas like this, which the Kurds claim for a state. And as fields levelled for Yazidi refugees mushroom into camps, reports are emerging of another massacre. Some 80 families reportedly herded together, all the men killed, all the women taken away.
Well, I've been speaking to Hoshyar Zabari, who until July, when the Kurds pulled out of the central government, had been foreign minister of Iraq for over 10 years. Now that Nouri al-Maliki has resigned as prime minister, Mr. Zabari is due to rejoin the new cabinet. I asked him how things in Iraq will now change.
Well, it will give the opportunity to the designated prime minister to start to form a new inclusive government and to unify the country to face up to the ISIS and terrorism, which is spreading throughout Iraq like a cancer.
Can Iraq be unified, though?
I believe in the future of this country, but I think it's moving toward more federalization than disintegration. This is how I see the future of this country.
And how will you take on ISIS if you couldn't take it on before?
Well, this is our fight in the first place, although it has regional, international dimension. But this is our fight to beat them back, to push them back with international support and help. This is an international threat. This is a common enemy. We implore all our friends to come and help us.
How? I mean, what do you mean by that?
With weapons, with assistance, with airstrikes, with humanitarian aid, with technical aid, with trainer, with advisor. And all of this is happening as we speak to you.
So what you want is American and British airstrikes to support Iraqi troops on the ground driving back ISIS?
We support that fully, and the Americans are already doing a magnificent job, a very courageous job.
Can the West breathe easy now?
Not the
ISIS
West.
is no threat to the rest of us.
No. The danger is not over. The ISIS danger is there. They have this ideology to establish an Islamic Khilafat. They have an agenda. They are not an underground organization. They control territories. They have armies. They have weapons. They have recruits. So I think that's why they have exposed themselves to the limit. And that's why all this international support and aid has come to our aid here in Iraqi Kurdistan, because people finally recognized how serious this threat is.
Do you bear any responsibility, having been part of this government for so long, for the way it's failed to be an inclusive government?
No, definitely. The government, which I'm part of that, although responsibility is different from one person to another, but we have publicly said that it bears a great deal of responsibility, the major responsibility for failures in many areas of security, of service, of economic development, of making best use of the country's resources, very rich resources.
But what do you say to Iraq's Sunnis now? Why should they trust you when you say this will be an inclusive government?
Well, they should. They have participated in the past, the Sunnis, so this is not the first time. But they have to be realistic. Those days of them as a minority controlling this country with the force and with a single army, with a nationalist ideology, marginalizing the majority of the Iraqi people are gone.
But isn't the truth that there will always be Sunni militants who refuse to buy into this future, and this country will be condemned to more terrorism?
I think that the key Sunni leaders, the genuine Sunni leaders, should be represented in the new government, okay? And they will have the added task, okay, to push those terrorists among their ranks. Then they have no place. These are evil people.
So, Britain is stepping up its engagement in the battle against the Islamic State, with today's news that the UK could help to arm the Kurds. But does the IS and the caliphate it has declared have any support in Britain? We've spoken to one young man who says he and his associates want to go out and live in the Islamic State. Our Home Affairs correspondent Simon Israel reports.
Under the river in London's Blackwall Tunnel, this month saw a flash pro-Palestinian demonstration. Amidst the horns and the bumpers were flags now seen flying in Syria and Iraq. The flag of ISIS. There are now a growing number in the UK who believe this extremist, sectarian, brutal movement is winning the religious war engulfing the Middle East, and they want to be part of that illusion of victory. Abu Rumaisa has 4 young children, has been arrested at least half a dozen times but never charged, and is committed to, at the very least, settling in the territory now being labelled the Islamic State.
I think you'll find that the location in Iraq and Syria that we're talking about is bigger than Britain and France. We're talking about an entire country. I think it's very naive of the government to think that they can prevent Muslims from desiring to migrate there and live under Islam peacefully.
How are you prevented from going?
I mean, there are threats, there are arrests happening as we speak. I know friends of mine who've immediately gone to European countries, to places like Sweden and other places, and they're being arrested on suspicion of going to Syria. So,
have you personally been stopped from leaving this country?
I haven't at the moment, but obviously I don't hold any reservations that I will. I mean, I think it's in the interests of the government to allow citizens in this country to migrate to places where they want to. It's better than for them to do that than to allow them to go underground and off the radar.
Crisis in the UK. We're living in the midst of a recession. Poverty.
He's been a regular over the years at pro-jihadi demonstrations, belonged to Al-Majroon, which has since been proscribed, and was one of the founders for Muslim Patrol in his area of East London. He firmly believes the Islamic State is spreading and is permanent. Would you be prepared to train as a fighter?
Well, I can't really speak on that because, I mean, if I were to say something that would promote terrorism or promote anything that would indicate that I am supporting terrorism, I'd be arrested.
So you can't tell me the truth, is that what you're saying?
The thing is, I mean, the ironic thing is that in this country you've got freedom of speech, but for Muslims there is no freedom. What I would say is that I'd love to live under the Islamic State, I'd love to live under the Sharia, and I hope one day that Britain gets to live under the Sharia as well.
But we have seen some of the most hideous videos on YouTube and on the internet. Beheadings, for example.
There is a war taking place around the world. There is a conflict between those who believe sovereignty belongs to God and those who believe sovereignty belongs to man. And there are people killing each other. Now, whether I support that or I don't support that, I think we need to take a reality check.
There is no sense of defeat for Abu Rumaisa, just one of destiny, whatever it takes. What would you be prepared to do to get there?
I mean, one of the tweets I did mention was that if the government were to allow an open and transparent way for Muslims to migrate to places where they want to, whether that be Afghanistan or India or even the Islamic states, that, you know, if they do that on the condition of perhaps, you know, renouncing citizenship, then I'm sure you'll see many Muslims willing to do that.
Renouncing British citizenship?
I think Muslims, they don't really hold the citizenship or the British passport, you know, at heart as much as many British people think.
These are not what I recognize to be Islamic teachings and principle. And so if somebody wants to live in that environment, renouncing British citizenship because they want to live in an Islamic state, I think they are simply misguided and lives in a cuckoo land, you know, not really having a faintest of idea what Islamic State is all about.
It's now widely accepted that at least 500 Brits are now fighting under the umbrella of ISIS. I learned this week that some 250 of them are from London alone. And the question uppermost in the minds of those in charge of security in this country is what will happen if the West pours more arms and equipment in the war against ISIS and some of those jihadists start coming home.
Well, with me now are 2 well-known British MPs who are in Erbil, former governor of an Iraqi province and chair of the Defence Select Committee, Rory Stewart, who's spending 5 days on a fact-finding mission here, and also Nadim Zahawi, himself of Kurdish descent and on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and also chairing the all-party group on Kurdistan. Rory Stewart, you've been to the front line today. Is giving some small arms and night vision goggles to the Kurds going to defeat the Islamic State militants?
No, that won't defeat the Islamic State. This is a very, very long-term process. I mean, it's a very troubling visit. I mean, Nadim and I were up there on the front line seeing what feels like the beginnings of a civil war. You've got young people, very old men coming out with guns. You've got students bringing in food supplies. It's reminiscent of Ukraine. It's very sad to come back to Iraq 10 years after I worked here to find that it's in this situation.
Nadim Zahawi, where do you think this is leading?
Well, what the commander told us today is he needs better training. He's effectively trying to secure a 60-kilometre territory with the Islamic caliphate, and he needs about 5,000 men. They need better equipment and training. But Rory's right to say what we also found is that the caliphate themselves are different caliber of fighters. There's the battle-hardened Syrian-type ISIS fighter. There is the Iraqi officers who were upset with Maliki who joined in, and then there's the opportunist who's joined in from the villages because they think these guys are strong and doesn't mind joining in and killing a few Christians or Yazidis. So it does feel like they need better training and better equipment and a strategy. That's the most important thing. We need some people here on the ground working out where this is heading and a proper strategy for a long-term battle to eradicate ISIS.
What is Britain's moral responsibility here? I mean, this is partly of the war's making, largely of the war's making. A few airstrikes enough?
Well, we have two moral obligations. We have a moral obligation towards the Iraqi people, and particularly the Yazidi minorities, the Kurds who've been long-term friends and supporters of Britain. We also have a moral obligation towards the British people. So we're walking a tightrope here where we had our fingers burned. We're going to have to be very cautious. We need far more information. I don't personally feel we have enough diplomats on the ground who really understand who ISIS are and what's going on. But we also need to act. We need to accept that in the end, ISIS are a seriously bad force. And anything that we can do to protect populations, contain their expansion, we ought to do.
So in real terms, what do you mean? Would you support British airstrikes in this region against Islamic State?
I think that's going to be very difficult to begin with, convincing the British public and the British Parliament. At the moment, America's taking the lead on that. My instinct is Britain would want a UN resolution on airstrikes, which isn't currently going through. So we need to focus on support, which could be arming, could be equipping, but above all, it's having a vision for Iraq. What's our long-term vision? What's going to happen to ISIS? What are we going to do with Baghdad? How do we deal with Iran?
I mean, the trouble is, while you know, you're busy converting the British population and bringing them along with you, people here are dying. I mean, there are more reports tonight of another massacre of up to 300 people.
Well, I think that's right. I think there is a short-term need here, which is humanitarian, which we are absolutely front and centre of. But then there's also the need for that support for the Kurdish army to be able to defend themselves and defend their populations, and they are calling very, very openly. There's the German foreign minister arriving here tomorrow, the French foreign minister's been here, we're here, so they're calling very openly to all of us to say, look, help us get better trained and better equipment to be able to take this battle to ISIS. But as Rory said, we need a longer-term vision for Kurdistan and for the rest of the country.
We just ran a report about Britons who want to come to live in the Islamic State. How worried are you about that?
Very. I had a PUK high-ranking official tell me that they have, I think, either killed or captured ISIS fighters, one with a Liverpool Football Club membership card and the other with a Gold's Gym from Ealing membership card. Now I'm trying to sort of get to the bottom of this and verify it, but they estimate there's about 500 to 700 fighters who've joined the Islamic Caliphate from the United Kingdom.
What kind of threat does that pose?
It is a significant threat. We've been complacent. This has been developing for a long time. In some ways, these people have been in Mosul for 2.5 years, and we woke up to it about 2.5 months ago. And we ignored them when they were developing in eastern Syria. We ignored them when they took Fallujah in January. This is a huge and growing problem. And some of those people are very, very clear in every interview they give that they want to come back and do jihad elsewhere.
I mean, there's been a sort of a temptation, a desire really in Britain to say, look, we can move away from Iraq now as a focus of British concentration. We need to think about other things. You've been saying yourself, we need to think about Russia. Actually, Iraq is back, isn't it, as one of our biggest concerns?
It is, but the lesson is, this time we have to be sensible, prudent, focused and moderate, by which I mean, let's not pretend that we can change the world. Let's not fantasize about being a superpower. Let's focus on concrete, real steps we can take, protect the humanitarian population, work out how we can support our friends the Kurds, work out how we stop ISIS expanding, and then slowly work out how we work with allies to push them back. So we don't want to lurch from complete isolation to over-expansion, which tends to be our problem again and again.
Nadine Zahawi, I know you're always very loyal to your Prime Minister, but I mean, this time, hasn't he been caught napping?
I think that's unfair. I think David Cameron was actually taking conference calls on holiday, came back to chair COBRA. He had Philip Hammond and Michael Fallon chairing COBRA. The humanitarian aid effort got off immediately and has continued, and actually he's clearly very concerned about this, clearly engaged with it. And I think it's unfair that to say, you know, just because, you know, he was on holiday, that he wasn't actually focused on this. His team was completely focused on this.
Nadeem Zahawi, Rory Stewart, thank you both very much indeed for joining us. More from here later in the programme, but for now back to Kathy.
Thanks, Krish. And from one crisis to another, and there's been a dramatic and dangerous escalation of the conflict in Ukraine. Kiev says its forces have destroyed part of a Russian armoured convoy that crossed into its territory overnight. Russia, though, has denied any military incursion, accusing Ukraine of trying to sabotage a delivery of aid. Britain has summoned the Russian envoy in London to clarify, as David Cameron said he was gravely concerned, urging both sides to reach a peaceful resolution. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, now reports.
Russian armoured vehicles at the border into Ukraine. They seem to have stopped at the customs point. One convoy reportedly crossed overnight, and a much larger one today. It's the first overt Russian incursion after months of arming pro-Russian separatists. But the Kremlin is still denying that its forces have gone over the border. In Kiev, the Ukrainian president was visiting soldiers who'd been captured and then released by the separatists. In a phone call with the British Prime Minister, he claimed that Ukrainian artillery had destroyed much of the Russian armour. His defence spokesman said they'd allowed the column in before attacking, but there's no independent confirmation.
I have to reassure you, this column was followed. It was always under the surveillance of our reconnaissance forces. Appropriate actions were undertaken, and a part of it no longer exists.
Journalists saw the Russian military convoy driving past aid trucks parked inside Russia. It headed down the road, reportedly crossing the Ukrainian border at Izvorinya, east of Luhansk and Donetsk, where fighting between Russian-backed rebels and Ukrainian forces has intensified. The Foreign Office summoned the Russian ambassador, while the Foreign Secretary attended an EU meeting in Brussels.
I'm very alarmed by reports that Russian military vehicles may have crossed the border this morning. Of course, the humanitarian convoy itself is a separate issue, but if there are any Russian military personnel or vehicles in eastern Ukraine, they need to be withdrawn immediately, or the consequences could be very serious. Thank you.
For several days now, Russia has been trumpeting the progress of a 280-vehicle convoy carrying aid from Moscow, supposedly for civilians in eastern Ukraine. It's bringing much-needed food and other supplies. But the trucks are military green, covered in white tarpaulins. Some are almost empty. And the self-proclaimed volunteers are all young men of military age in identical khaki shorts. At least one was sporting a military tattoo, and they appear to have top cover. The Ukrainian government says the Russian aid won't be allowed to cross the border unless it's inspected and distributed by the Red Cross. President Putin was meeting his Finnish counterpart today, talking about trade and sanctions. Russian and Ukrainian officials also met today, and further talks are scheduled for Sunday, a chance to pull back from the brink. In Donetsk, families shelter underground as the Ukrainian military shell the city, trying to drive out the remaining separatists. The people need aid. More than anything, they need a let-up in the fighting. But today's events suggest that this conflict has entered a new phase, fraught with danger.
Lindsay Hilson reporting. Now, it's a drug which can make the last few months of life a little longer and a little easier to bear. But the health watchdog NICE says it now won't be offering it to men with prostate cancer until after they've had chemotherapy. Handing it out earlier, they said, would simply not be cost-effective. Charities have called the whole episode a fiasco, which would rob some patients of extra time with their loved ones. Cordelia Lynch reports.
I think it's pretty wondrous. You know, it might not be the wonder drug, but it certainly does well for me.
Kevin Hughes isn't prone to big statements, but as a prostate patient, he says the drug abiraterone has changed the way he sees the world.
So this is my personal journey in a chart, if you like.
A big difference.
Absolutely, yeah. You can see the drop. You can see the marks sort of drop away as the abiraterone kicks in.
He's halfway through a 2-year trial, and he's charting his rapid progress.
You know, it's made a major change. You know, I've got young granddaughters. I may not be able to see them get married, but I will at least see them grow up now, where perhaps I wouldn't have done before. You know, I can't foresee the future, but I've definitely got a good feeling about it, that's for sure.
But a bid for others to use the drug before chemotherapy has been rejected by the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, and Kevin doesn't know if he'll be able to continue taking it.
I feel so disappointed for the other guys that come behind me. Not getting this option is, well, it's a crime in my book, you know. I just don't think it's the right decision.
Abiraterone is currently available to men who have undergone chemotherapy and can extend their lives by around 6 months. Cancer charities say if administered earlier, it could delay a patient having chemotherapy by more than 2 years. But at almost £3,000 per patient per month, NICE say it isn't cost effective. Some believe it is a flawed assessment in a skewed system.
The fact that this drug has been turned down by NICE is an absolutely disgraceful decision, and it's a result of a fiasco of a process. It's about NICE not being able to get their act together with the drug company and essentially approve a drug that we know is making a huge difference to many, many men who are accessing it now through the Cancer Drugs Fund.
In a statement, the head of NICE said, "We know how important it is for patients to have the option to delay chemotherapy and its associated side effects, so we are disappointed not to be able to recommend abiraterone for use in this way." However, the manufacturer's own economic model demonstrated that the drug does not offer enough benefit to justify its price. It comes just a week after a breast cancer drug was also rejected on affordability grounds. For Kevin and others, the move could be life-changing.
To be offered abiraterone and then to see the effect it's had has actually made another step change back, if you like. It's sort of given me a little bit of hope in, you know, in my future.
Cordelia Lynch. Police in the Missouri town of Ferguson have tried to calm days of violent protests by naming the officer who shot dead an unarmed black teenager on Saturday. The local police chief said Darren Wilson had shot 18-year-old Michael Brown after a struggle. But in a new twist, they claimed the young man was a prime suspect in a robbery committed just moments earlier. Our Washington correspondent Kylie Morris reports.
24 hours on and not an armoured vehicle in sight. After the violent scenes this week, an intervention by the Missouri governor, encouraged by the president himself, seems to have brought calm to Ferguson.
This is a place where people work, raise their families, and go to church, a diverse community. But lately it's looked a little bit more like a war zone. I'm announcing that the Missouri Highway Patrol, under the supervision of Captain Ron Johnson, who grew up in this area, will be directing the team that provides security in Ferguson.
And so it was goodbye to the riot-clad, rubber bullet-firing St. Louis County Police, with a penchant for targeting journalists with tear gas.
Let's go! Let's go!
And hello's State Highway Patrol, or more specifically, Captain Ron Johnson, walking without body armour among the people, speaking without the aid of a loudhailer.
Last night was a great night. We did not deploy tear gas. We did not have any roadblocks. We did not make any arrests. It was a good night.
Violence had convulsed through the town since the weekend shooting of Michael Brown, an unarmed black teenager shot multiple times by a white police officer. When asked by the community for explanations, local police responded with military-style force. This morning, the visibly anxious county police commander delivered the one thing protesters most wanted, the name of the officer who shot Michael Brown.
The officer that was involved in the shooting of Michael Brown was Darren Wilson. He's been a police officer for 6 years, has had no disciplinary action taken against him. He was treated for injuries which occurred on Saturday.
But the police chief also delivered something else, the reason why Officer Darren Wilson stopped Michael Brown. They've distributed video of a robbery at the local convenience store. They claim the man who you can see in the grey T-shirt and red hat is Michael Brown, stealing some cigars. Before he leaves, he assaults the shopkeeper. 10 minutes after that footage was recorded, when a description of the robbery suspect was broadcast on police radio, Officer Darren Wilson drove up alongside the teenager. It's a kind of police fight back that challenges the narrative of an unarmed teenager pursued by police for no reason. But already Michael Brown's family has hit back, saying they're outraged at what they call a devious attempt by the police to destroy their son's character. It's only evidence, they say, of why the family and local community have so little trust in their police. Ferguson's newfound harmony already under stress.
Still to come tonight, he became known as the man in the green shirt. We've been back to the street in Gaza where a young Palestinian was allegedly shot dead by an Israeli sniper to investigate what really happened. And science fiction turns unstoppable phenomenon. We're at the world's biggest sci-fi convention, catching up with the writer behind Game of Thrones.
Everybody wants the books finished. No one as much as me, but you know, you still have to write them. Just wishing them to be done doesn't get them written.
Welcome back to northern Iraq. Well, our correspondent Jonathan Rugman is live in Dohuk. Jonathan, what can you tell us about these reports tonight of another massacre of Yazidis?
We're talking, Krish, about a village called Kaju, which is south of Sinjar city. It is trapped behind the jihadist front line. It has not been liberated by the American airstrikes of the last week. Our contacts in the region cannot get through by phone to anybody in Kaju, but word has emerged from the village that jihadists from Islamic State have rounded up about 80 families in a school. They have separated the men from the women. They have told the men that they have to convert to Islam. The men have refused. The men reportedly have been executed, and the women have been taken away and reportedly sold. Now, we can't confirm this, but it is coming from several sources in the region that we've contacted tonight. The question, of course, is whether the Kurds, who are being armed now by the Europeans and the Americans, will fight for a place like Kaju. The Kurds are inclined to fight for what are called disputed areas with Baghdad, areas that they want to claim for a Kurdish state. Now, that may or may not include Kaju. And you have to remember, when you arm the Kurds, as Britain is intending to do now, well, Iraq's Kurds, they are primarily standing for the Kurds.
Jonathan Rugman, thank you for that. Well, it is the effect of these sorts of stories of massacres, both confirmed and unconfirmed, like the one tonight, that are terrorizing people across this country. I've been down today to the St. Joseph's Church here in Erbil, where Christians from Mosul and Karakosh are seeking sanctuary. They told us how the mere sound of the Islamic State had made them flee their homes. Erbil's Christians marked the Assumption, the ascent of the Virgin Mary to heaven. The Church of St. Joseph was packed, but most of the worshippers are refugees, driven from their homes by Islamist militants. Call them ISIS, Islamic State, or Daesh. Whatever name you use, it strikes terror.
We were frightened they'll take our sons and daughters. What do we do now? Our Iraq is lost. Everything is gone. They made us flee the city.
Sana Johanna fled Karakosh with her 5 children. It was the biggest Christian urban centre in Iraq, but they didn't wait for ISIS to arrive. They'd heard the stories of what happens when they do.
Either you convert to Islam or we kill you, or take you hostage. That was their condition. Or they want your money. If you give them your money and gold, they leave you. If you don't give your money, you must join them. How can somebody leave their religion? Have you ever heard of such a thing?
They can't believe this has happened to them, and they are bewildered. Even in a churchyard, there are haves and have-nots, with fury that the refugees must sleep outside when the church buildings are air-conditioned. Tempers fray over small things in the desperation. A Samaritan has brought ice cream for the children, but a fight breaks out over who should get it. Even the priest is a refugee, and he has no faith in the government.
We need protection under the United Nations.
Are you afraid?
Afraid from which?
ISIS?
I don't know, but I am a priest. I have many people, so if the ISIS killed me, all these people, they have afraid, no?
Just over here. Muntaha Adam is alone here. She doesn't even know where her children are. There was no room in the car as the family fled the arrival of the militants.
They arrived and went to the stadium. They started shouting, Allah Akbar. When we heard them, we fled. They will definitely kill us.
This deluge of refugees is already transforming Erbil. They are sheltering in the very building sites intended to make this oil-rich city another Middle Eastern playground. The ISIS advance may be slowed or even paused in northern Iraq, but elsewhere in the country, they're still gaining. Nobody here believes they'll be going home soon. Well, to another part of the Middle East now, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because he was shot as he searched for members of his family in the ruins of their Gaza homes. 23-year-old Salim Shamali allegedly killed as he strayed into the path of an Israeli sniper. Video filmed by local activists showed the young man being shot twice, and a former Israeli soldier told this program last week that troops fired after he crossed a theoretical red line. So what really happened? Our reporter Inigo Gilmore has spoken to Shamali's family and travelled to the street in Gaza where he died, to the house where the fatal bullets may have been fired from. This is his special investigation.
A mother comforts her distraught son. Mohammed has been rushed to hospital in deep shock. It's 3 weeks since his older brother was shot dead in the Shujaiya neighborhood of Gaza. Mohammed was overwhelmed after he visited the place where he died. All across Gaza, families are struggling to deal with the agony of losing a loved one. For the Shamali family, the pain has been uniquely acute. Everyone here knows about the killing of Salim Shamali. His death was caught on camera. Last month, the video of his shooting was seen around the world. Salim had been with this group of international and local activists at the time. I went back with them to retrace his final steps. They told me their version of events.
And you're filming all of this as you're walking along?
Yeah, that's right.
It was Mohammed, who is from Gaza, who captured that video on his phone. He told me he'd never met Salim before, but they agreed to help him try to find his relatives.
There is... When?
Me and Salim, we were shouting if there is anyone still alive, anyone, and we shouted a lot, in case if there is anyone injured. Salim helped also in like carrying the injury until they got the ambulance.
And was there any indication that there was any Israeli military around here?
No, nothing. We saw nothing here. We just hear drones. And
like we're hearing now?
Yeah, exactly. Like
some drones?
Yeah, some drones, but more than that also. You can see like a lot of drones in the area. So we thought also that they can see us. They know we are here, and we are in the middle of ceasefire, so nothing should happen. We are coming here to help people.
After helping some injured civilians, the group then moved on and reached the street. The house of Salim's relatives was just a few blocks further up. He repeatedly calls out for them. The street now looks very different after further heavy bombing, but the activists insisted they could still recognize where they were. When we reached the spot where they say Salim was killed, they pointed out the high-vis vests they'd left behind. The group told me that as they were walking past an alleyway to the left, a shot suddenly rang out.
A shot came that divided the group in two parts. So me, Fred, and Joe, an American guy, went backwards and took shelter from this house. They were standing here by then, and the other three took shelter by that house.
So Mohammed is standing where he is now?
Yeah.
Yalla, I'm not scared.
The group was now split up, and emerging from a house, Salim stepped back into the alleyway. The first shot that hit him is not caught on camera. Next time we see him, he lies injured in the rubble.
Salam moved a little bit to this alley, and he got the first shot in his left leg, and I was like taping it. Then when he tried, I asked him if he can move. He told me, no, I can't move.
So he fell down from the second shot that was fired?
Yeah.
And then?
And then a third shot. He tried, I think he just, tried to make movement to get up, basically. And then the third shot was fired, which killed him, basically.
That was the fatal shot?
Yeah.
Looking up from where Salem's body lay, a house is clearly visible down what was the alleyway. On the wall, a spray-painted cross. We were told by locals that Israeli soldiers marked the house after occupying it. We went over to have a look. I was taken inside by a young man called Hatem. The house was trashed and Hebrew writing was daubed on the walls. Standing at the windows we'd seen from the other side, we found sandbags. It's an ideal vantage point for a wide view of the area. Around us, buildings were pockmarked with bullet holes. And looking back to where we'd been with the activists, you can clearly see the place where Salem was killed.
I'm standing opposite where Salem Shamali died, and from here I can see through the alleyway to the exact spot where he was killed. Anyone shooting from here would have had a clear line of fire.
Hatem showed me what he believed to be a sniper's position. Bullet casings were scattered all around. He also showed me the house next door. It was badly damaged, and around the rooms evidence of the presence of Israeli soldiers, including discarded uniforms. On this wall, "Long live Israel" is scrawled by Stars of David. On other walls, maps of the area. Elsewhere, we found the names of soldiers scribbled in what seemed to be shift rotas. Clearly, the troops were here for some time. All of these details may be important evidence in any investigation into what happened to Salem. The Israeli military told us allegations surrounding cases like this are taken seriously and that they will be reviewing this case. Last week, an Israeli activist told Channel 4 News he'd taken testimony from 3 Israeli soldiers who say they witnessed Shamali's killing. The soldiers told him it was known that Salem was an unarmed civilian.
You can see it clearly here. The entrance of the bullet, and
his family believe they have enough to bring a war crimes case. Mohammed Al-Qatawi, a cousin, showed me pictures he took after Salem's badly decomposed body was eventually retrieved 6 days after his death. A bullet entry wound is clearly visible.
Do you think there's a strong case you have?
Yeah, exactly. And we have to follow it, and we have to go forward to sue the guys who's responsible for killing Salem.
The family are also encouraged by talk of the Palestinian Authority signing up to the International Criminal Court, a move that could allow their case to be taken up. But even with all the available video and other potential evidence, finding justice for Salem will be no easy task. Hundreds of cases of unlawful killings in Gaza have been brought against Israel in recent years, but they've gone nowhere.
Inigo Gilmore with that special report. Now, our heads hang in shame. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has broken his silence on the rising numbers of sexual assaults against women in his first Independence Day speech. In a hard-hitting and largely unscripted address, he urged parents to raise their sons properly. After all, he said, the rapist is also someone's son. Modi promised to bring sweeping change when he won the election in May, but this is the first time he's spoken out on sexual violence and the role of women since he took office. Debate over the issue has raged since the gang rape and murder of a young woman 18 months ago. Well, joining me now from Delhi is the award-winning author Hoshyar Zabari. Kishwar, he spoke without notes. It really seemed as if it was from the heart. It was pretty surprising, wasn't it?
Not really, I think, because, you know, he is one of the few people that we have in politics today who is a grassroots politician. He understands the problems, I think, much more than we really think he does. If you remember, he comes from a fairly poverty-stricken background himself, so he understands the issues which often assail the underdog. And in this case, it is women, you know, who have been oppressed in this country. And I think there is a certain amount of sympathy and empathy that he expressed in his speech today about them. It's very important to remember that, you know, Indian women are still very unfree in this country after 68 years of independence, and that is what he pointed out.
Well, do you think the appeal to parental responsibility will work, or is the real underlying problem police corruption?
I think what he said, very simply, is the heart of the problem. It is the differences that the way we bring up our children, you know, and we treat our sons and our daughters very, very differently. And as he said very rightly, that we tell our daughters, don't do this, don't do that, and we're constantly putting curbs on their liberty, and we never even ask our sons, where do you go, what do you do? And that is the differentiation which most families make. And that is where all these issues come up, where men begin to think that they are more powerful, and all the issues that we have faced recently about rape and sexual assault come from a society that spends a lot of time, you know, looking after the men and not really addressing the issues that women face.
And of course, the abortion of girls has led to a very male-dominated society, and that was also an issue he addressed.
Absolutely. I mean, that goes unquestioned. I mean, it is a very, very terrible thing that we have been doing in this country, in India, which is the infanticide. Appalling figures which still continue to rise, you know, as you know, that there is a great, you know, discrepancy between the figures for boys and for girls. But I think the other basic issue he raised was one of toilets. And, you know, it is absolutely dreadful that we still do not have toilets where women can go. In villages, for example, they are forced to go to the fields. And as you know, that the recent rapes which happened in places like Uttar Pradesh are largely linked to this, because women are very unsafe. The lack of toilets raises issues of security, and girls drop out of schools because there are no toilets for them.
Well, just briefly, the government has introduced tough new laws on sexual violence, but there's been a spate of attacks since then. Will anything change? You once wrote about rape being endemic in India. Is it still, or will it change?
I think it is definitely going to change. I think Modi today has sent out some very strong signals that he is going to expect the lawmakers to actually look out for the rights of women. And I think he's made a very encouraging start today, and we have to hope for the best for the future.
Kishwar Desai, thank you very much for joining me. See it, tweet it, repeat it. But fans who share unofficial videos of goals on the internet might be breaking the law. And the Premier League has vowed to clamp down. Hundreds of thousands of people are using Twitter's video sharing service Vine to upload clips they've recorded off the TV. So where does that leave the newspapers, which have paid millions of pounds for the rights to play highlights on mobile phones? Our technology reporter, Jeff White, has this.
The glory days of live football may have had edge-of-your-seat excitement, but there was a problem. Blink and you miss the goal. Modern technology solves that problem, but not always by strictly legal methods.
Fans can basically self-publish their own instant replays online. So if I'm watching a game and I see a particularly good goal or a good save, all I have to do is this. I wait for the instant replay and I use an app called Vine. Once I hit the screen, Vine starts recording. It records 6 seconds of gameplay, and once I'm done, I can publish it instantly to Twitter. Fans are doing this by the thousand.
It's easy, it's quick, but it's illegal, claims the Premier League, which says it's clamping down on the practice. It's obvious why. Goal clips are big business, and it's sold the rights to them. For example, if you go to the Times, you'll pay between £8 and £26 a month for highlights. The Sun, meanwhile, is charging people around £8 a month. Some football fans, though, are unimpressed with the Premier League's threats, and pundits fear it may have scored an own goal.
They don't really understand why they're going after the little guys. Effectively, they're just kids filming their television or filming their internet streams and posting them online. It's a lot harder to shut down the professional internet streams that do match day rebroadcasts effectively, illegally. So they're kind of going after the easy target to a certain extent.
So who's behind it? Channel 4 News spoke to Football Vines, one of the biggest in the field, with 500,000 Twitter followers and 3,000 videos. They told us,
the threat of legal action on the uploaders of these vines we believe to be a scare tactic, as the reality of policing this is incredibly difficult. At no point whatsoever do we, as a team, upload the vines ourselves. We are merely posting what we can find on the internet. We do this for our love of the beautiful game, not profit.
And later, of course, they sent us a vine too.
Football Vines is for the fans, by the fans. However, we respect the fact that the Premier League want to protect their content.
Some lawyers believe retweeting is little different to posting the footage in the first place.
The law is a grey area. However, the way that recent case law is going, was the courts try and get to grips with social media and how this is fast evolving, I would say that that would be an infringement of those rights as well.
The Premier League says fans should get their football fix from legitimate outlets. But technology will keep throwing up these challenges, and those who run the beautiful game could be forgiven for pining for the old days.
Well, are you a sci-fi fan? And are you neither an anorak nor a geek? Perhaps you're one of thousands who have descended on London this weekend for one of the biggest ever sci-fi conventions, an art form that's never been more popular. Its success has boomed thanks to hit shows like Game of Thrones, now one of the biggest talking points on television. Our reporter Boyadi has been down to the intergalactic gathering to meet the writer behind a TV phenomenon.
It's an interplanetary gathering like no other. Space, goblins, manga, X-Men, all the staples of die-hard sci-fi fans here to get their geek on. So I've beamed in to boldly mix my sci-fi analogies and find out why more and more of us are going extraterrestrial. I'm here at the World Science Fiction Convention in London. And this year it has attracted more fans than ever before, with over 10,000 people descending on the capital. Worldcon, this year named LonCon, is in its 72nd year. Recently, the sci-fi genre has seen something of a resurgence.
We've got a wizard. Do we really need one more?
I don't know.
I think as the world gets nastier, the escapism that fantasy and science fiction present to people, I think that's what they like.
It's about worlds that aren't like mine. That I get to, experience things that don't really exist in my day-to-day life.
Sci-fi has come a long way in the last 60 or so years, since classics like the original War of the Worlds. Now much more polished productions are on offer and have been embraced by major TV networks, like HBO's Game of Thrones. It's based on an unfinished series of books called A Song of Ice and Fire, and has developed a cult following, a fact not lost on the book's author.
Oh, I feel pressure all the time. But I always have, I mean, everybody wants the books finished. No one as much as me, but, you still have to write them. Just wishing them to be done doesn't get them written, and it's hard work and it's long work. They're big books. They're complicated books.
Both the books and the TV adaptation have a raunchy reputation, but some have questioned why gay sex scenes, which were added to the TV series, were not originally written into the books.
I included some pretty important and I think heroic gay characters, but they weren't viewpoint characters. And since I use a strict kind of third-person viewpoint structure, the gay sex scenes took place off stage. But who knows if that will be true for the last two books. Yeah.
And he had a parting message.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
Before I left, I had to address the elephant in the room, those costumes.
This is the notorious Master Sword that the characters of the Zelda universe keep on using, even though it's like 1,000 years old by now.
So I actually show up to work like this every day.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, I'm a software engineer.
You know what? At the start of the day, you couldn't have paid me enough to dress up to look like one of these guys. But after spending a day at the World Con, I think I'm ready to get my geek on.
The most ungeeky boyardee. Tonight's main news, Europe gives the go-ahead to member states to send weapons to Kurdish forces fighting the Islamic State insurgents in northern Iraq. We're back at 6:40 tomorrow night. Until then, from Krishna in Iraq and from me here in London, that's Channel 4 News. Have a very good evening.